It's Word Wednesday, and here's God's Word for you.
Here's God's word for you for today.
Here's God's word for you today.
Hello, IBC Youth. I'm Jasmine, and here's God's word for you today. Psalm chapter 4 verse 4 says, "In your anger, do not sin. When you're on your beds, search your hearts and be silent." If you look at Psalms chapter 3 to 7, these psalms are all written by David when he was being pursued by his enemies. There was this desperation and maybe even anger in his tone as he cries out for God to deliver him. Given his situation, David had every reason to be angry, irritated, and frustrated. But still, David writes that we should not sin in our anger. Rather than taking things into his own hands and trying to subdue his enemies by his own power, David trusted in God and submitted himself to God. He anchored himself in God's faithfulness, which is the very reason why David, even in his anger, did not let anger lead him into sinful disbelief. In Ephesians chapter 4 verses 26 and 27, Paul echoes Psalm chapter 4 verse 4 by writing, "Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Anger as emotion is not a sin, but acting out of anger and holding on to this anger will lead us into sin. When we take matters into our own hands, we allow anger to have power over us. But we are called to follow the example of David by releasing this anger and discontentment into God's hands and trusting Him, and in doing so, inviting God into our hearts and surrendering control to Him. Even though you may be angry, do not lose sight of what you have put your faith in. In Psalm chapter 20 verse 7, David says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." Our God is a faithful God, deserving of our trust. As such, we should place any anger that we harbor into His hands, trusting in what He will do. Remember this: we are people under the power of God, not under the power of anger.